Probably the first way and maybe the most intuitive way is what we call a monadic test. So it's a one bowl test. And what you do is you provide the food for the pet and you evaluate how much they eat. Do they eat it in a way that provides all the calories that they need, all the nutrition that's needed? And really, it's a pass or fail test. If the pet enjoys it enough so that they don't restrict their consumption because it's just not good enough to maintain life or maintain body composition, then if you pass the monadic test.
Hello and welcome to the Pet Food Science podcast brought to you by Genetics. I'm Jan Sogodolski and dedicated to bringing you the latest insights and discussions in the pet food science industry. So get ready to expand your knowledge and stay ahead with today's episodes. And today I'm really greatly honored to welcome the great Dr. Dennis Jewell, who has a huge history in the pet food science area, right? Currently is a faculty or adjunct faculty at Kansas State University. But he worked for many companies. And Dennis, welcome.
Yes, well, I'm so glad to be here, and I'm really excited about having this conversation with you. And thanks for the kind introduction.
Absolutely. And now, Dennis, I let you introduce yourself. The overall topic today is going to be palatability, and you have a lot of experience in the pet food science industry. You have a lot of experience with working with companies and academia, so it's going to be a really exciting conversation today. So tell me a little bit, Dennis, what was your history? Where did you start? What was your career path? And how did you end up where you are now?
Well, I started really being interested in science in general. My undergraduate degree is natural science, and then I got interested in biology of life and how things work and why they work. And it seems like a reasonable application was nutrition. My PhD was in cellular physiology. Application was always nutrition. I started out running labs for a living. I really liked the order and mechanism of just getting measurements. Somewhere in there, my bosses decided that having people with chemistry backgrounds is better to run labs than having me do it. And I enjoyed moving on to more I think more interesting biological science and the trying to create the order out of the chaos that normally comes from a biological experiment. Started out, obviously, as all of us do, I think, through academia, and then I moved into industry, worked for Purina for a while, and then spent most of my time at Hill's Pet Nutrition, where we had fantastic resources, things that in my PhD only governments could buy, and then suddenly they're available in the lab next door, and so we could tear into the biology of life. It's very interesting, and it sort of runs into palatability in a hurry. Actually, that we, especially the food scientists, would always tell me, if they won't eat it, your nutrition will have no value, Dr. Jewell. So that's how we got to this particular topic, which is a fascinating topic. Actually, it's sort of the outward sign. Often people proclaim it maybe more important than it is because it's that outward sign of a value to their pet. But I'd like to talk, today about how we measure it and why it might be important and where it sort of might be considered more important than I think it is. So.
Kemin Nutrissurance is compelled to provide safe and delicious ingredients to improve our pets' food so they can have the best quality of life. Every day, they deliver specialized expertise, innovative products, and unrivaled support through the pet food and rendering value chain. From oxidation control and food safety to palatability and nutrition, all the way through a suite of tailored services that support you from start to finish, we ensure you're getting the most from Kemin ingredients. Kemin is compelled by curiosity to ensure pets around the world are living happy and healthy lives.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, maybe before we start in the details, so when did palatability really become an issue or like a big topic, right? I don't think maybe in which part of the pet food process, and how did people come to it, and then we're going to come how to measure it, but just from the history.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I think we always saw that if a pet enjoyed it, that was something we enjoyed with them. And if they wouldn't eat it, we'd go, well, we want another food. But I think it did develop over time When I started really deep diving into the biology of pets, my mentor was a person, Dr. Morris, and he didn't care much about palatability. He kind of had the idea he would really use a sort of monadic test as a test, like you would allow them to eat what they wanted when they wanted, and if they ate enough to maintain body weight, good enough. What mattered then was the nutrition, and he was very focused on the nutritional value of pet food. I think, and so that would have been maybe, in the late 80s, almost, I'm so old. I feel old even when I say things like that. But then people started going, yeah, but the experience my pet is having is really important to me, as well as the nutrition, of course, but I want both. I want that pet to have this experience of they really like the pet food, and I'll pay for that. And that sort of drives the industry when someone says, I'm not going to buy your food because my pet likes that food better. And so then people started going, I really care. And they started investing, industry and academic resources into what is that preference? How do we measure that preference? What does that preference mean? And so that, I would guess that's really in the last 40 years of pet food science.
So Dennis, tell me how do we measure palatability?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question. There's a number of ways. Probably the first way, and maybe the most intuitive way, is what we call a monadic test. So it's a one bowl test. And what you do is you provide the food for the pet and you evaluate how much they eat. Do they eat it in a way that provides all the calories that they need, all the nutrition that's needed? And really, it's a pass or fail test. If the pet enjoys it enough so that they don't restrict their consumption because it's just not good enough to maintain life or maintain body composition, then if you pass the monadic test, they eat enough. Interestingly, of course, if you leave pets on a food, maybe they don't like it so much. So you can kind of have a time response where in a few days, maybe they start losing a little weight or they start getting a little more hungry and they eat it fine. But of course, the monadic test will tell you, well, you want it better than that. You want to eat it well enough, when they first experience it. The most common test is not that. The most common test is a comparative test, which is really two bowls. You have a sort of bowl A and bowl B, and then what you do is you switch them so you don't have a sided effect. And the question then, both bowls have enough food in them so that the pet can eat all they want, or all that would be, perhaps if it's on a kind of food controlled, so they don't become obese, food controlled regimen, they then, when they've eaten all of one food, rather than just, okay, I want more food, now I'm going to the next one, even though I preferred the first one, then the food is removed. And the mathematics that you do to evaluate that is really the food from, say, diet A over the total food consumed. So that obviously would range from 0 to 1. And you ask, is that different than 0.5? And so you have good, robust statistics about that. And you can sort of scientifically evaluate in that test there was a difference. Interestingly, that test has been shown quite frequently to be quite valuable in predicting what people say about their pets when they observe their pet eating in their home setting. Of course, that's kind of what you really want to know. Does that pet enjoy it when they're in their environment, when they're at home? And this test tends to predict that fairly well. It's more precise in the sense of you can find a difference that maybe is quite small and wouldn't matter much out in the home setting, but it is quite related, quite correlated to that. So if someone comes home and says, that my pet just doesn't like it, it probably had a very low 2-pan PAL test response. And if they say, my pet loves it, that's the best food ever eaten, it's probably going to have a very high 2-pan PAL test. Now, just to run down the whole mechanisms, the other one that I've used rarely, but you can imagine this test, this 2-pen test that we're talking about, it has some kind of built-in problems if, in fact, you're feeding a weight control food. Because you might want this food to be really enjoyed, but not overconsumed. And so you say, well, the measurement says I want to overconsume that food. And so we've played with a couple of different ways of going after that. It's kind of a different question, or maybe a different space for the same question. One of them that I'm fascinated with, and both dogs and cats will do this, is they will work for food. Maybe you get them to press a little lever or run a little, maze, and they'll work more for a food they like more. So it's kind of removing that, how much did I eat, and sort of pushing it towards how much do I want to eat it, which is, that's a nice way of looking at it. It's a much harder test to run, and maybe often doesn't give you a much different answer, but it's a clearer answer, right? You suddenly have a desired component of that palatability testing. Mm-hmm. I probably should have led the most easy thing we do with people, right, is we ask them, what did you like the food? How did it taste to you? And they'll talk about mouthfeel or particular notes that they maybe really like. Oh, this is spicy. I really like that flavor that I'm feeling. And we can't ask the pet. Yep. And so we end up with these rather gross methods or large methods of evaluating it. Maybe one more that I think I haven't used that much, but people are using more and more, is looking at approach, meal frequency, and which, if I've got this another fourth test is this idea of looking at maybe the operative things that are going on. Does a pet go to a particular food first? Do they spend more time with that food? And we understand it better. I'm not sure I know which one would communicate higher palatability in some ways. If I spend a lot of time with that food versus I eat it very robustly, but people they want meal size, meal frequency, first approach. These sorts of things can give us a little different, maybe a deeper understanding of what that experience is with the pet. I have done one other thing that sort of maybe is the next area to discuss, Jan, but we have tried multiple bowls. So we often say, is test food A different than test food B? And then it's just it's like, I don't know if this evaluation will work, but it's like you're looking at a lens, and which lens is better, lens A or lens B, lens D? It's always a two bowl test, but it doesn't have to be. We've had 3 bowls, 4 bowls, and that's kind of a different question. In the presence of this bowl, do they like this, or would they prefer a combination of foods? And that we've done that too. It's a harder test to run, but it's an interesting one, and you get kind of the same answers, but not always the same. As to, if I can have a little bit of A, maybe I like B better, and then I want some of C too. So I've run that test.
Let me ask a quick question just for the testing itself. So to get robust answers, what is your recommendation? How often does it have to be repeated? How many animals?
Well, it's a scientific question based on the variability of the test, right? So how often you test is a fascinating question because it might give you a different answer. Does the pet acquire a taste for it, and does that test change over time? And we've run very long tests, 30-day tests, 40-day tests. We've concluded, maybe for a number of reasons, one, certainly because you want to do more tests than you can do if you're running 40 days, that a 2-day test is kind of a good answer. It's kind of an industry standard answer.
Okay, 2 days only.
Has a chance to kind of think about the food. But it is that initial point, and maybe over a 40-day test, it might spin a little bit. Usually not. So we do 2 tests. And then, of course, fascinating question as to the number of animals. Because if you have a big difference, and you and I talk about this actually just in science, you have a big difference, you need fewer pets. You have a small difference, you need larger pets. And so do you want what's the power of the test and the variability of the test, and then the difference, that all runs. I think a pretty average answer is 20 pets. And then you kind of go to 40 pets if you think you're trying to get a pretty fine-tuned answer. So 20 pets for 2 days is I think a pretty close good. But if you look at, and now, I know, again, you always wonder who's listening to this, but if you think of those t-tests, in a 20, you start getting out on the tail. You move back from 20 on a t-test, which is what you're doing. Is a t-test is different than 0.5. And you get down to even a few n, down to 15 or so, really changes the power of that test. So we like 20, you push to 40. And then there's one last thing that sort of fits in there. There's a type 1 or type 2 error. Is it different or is it the same? If you're asking, is it the same, you need more pets, because then you're trying to do that beta error rather than alpha error. And then you probably 40 and up for saying, yeah, they're actually the same at some level of confidence.
And when you mentioned, say, pets, where are the dogs coming from? I mean, do companies have their own pets, or you try to actually really go to real pets in the real world?
Well, we've done both. I think the most precise tests are done with pets that are maintained as, that's what they do for a living. A number of pet food companies do this very well, and I like to tell people how well off those pets are. I mean, I've had pets myself, and I've been involved with pets in these industry settings, and I actually think the industry setting probably did better than pets in my home, and I really cared about the pets in my home. But they have wonderful facilities. They have lots of interaction with pets and caretakers, and they get outside and they have toys, they play. It's a good life. And if what they do for that life is tell me which food is better, that's not a bad test to be involved with either. You get more a precise answer, but if you can sort of make up for that precision with numbers.
So Dennis, you always mention pets. Can you tell us, where do companies, are those company-owned dogs, or do usually you go to real pets when you test palatability?
Well, you can do both. I've been involved with both, and I always like to tell about the company-owned pets, because people they don't understand how often these pets are maintained. They're really they have a great environment. They have a lot of interaction with other pets. The dogs or cats, they have great interactions with their caretakers. They have toys. They have running outside in the facilities I've had as far as part of their life, or in the cat's case, availability to porches. So these are very home-like settings, if you will, very happy pets, and then we use them. You can use pets in the home setting. You just take more of them. It's a less precise test. So we talked about maybe 20 or 40 pets in the facility. Testing is quite precise. You might need 100 pets, 150 pets on a in-home testing to get the same power of evaluation.
And so palatability is very important, obviously. You, from your experience, if a company produces a new food, where in the pipeline would you suggest they should start with palatability?
Oh, that's great. Immediately is the answer. Because think about, you're making a cake. If you make a cake with rotten materials, you can't make a cake anybody wants to eat. You make a cake with really good materials, just the best you can buy, you're going to have a cake likely that people really want to eat. So you have to start right away. You have to start just at the beginning of ingredient procurement to know what's going on. And then the other thing that I would say frequently and right away is, one thing you learn, I think I've learned, and I wonder if your case is, there's so much value in just trying. Just, if you wait to the end of your hypothesis and you put the marshmallow on top and you realize the whole thing falls when the marshmallow's on top, you've really failed. Your tower doesn't work. But if right away you're there testing and saying, do they like it? Is it good? That has value. Of course, it's an independent, one might almost say orthogonal development from the nutrition, right? So you may be out there running a nutrition thing. Does a polyphenol change antioxidant capacity. I want to know that, just plain flat out. Pet doesn't like the polyphenol, I'm going to try and overcome that. But yeah, I want testing early and fast with PAL.
Well, now the important part is what are the tricks to improve palatability? So what are the industry-backed tricks that you can disclose to us?
Well, I think there's, I don't think there's necessarily a lot of my patents on palatability have expired, I think, for example. But, the first thing I talked about is ingredient quality. And so that's just flat out can't be underestimated in the sense of you just need it. You need a lot of that. If your meat is oxidized before you get it, if it went rancid, the pet doesn't want to eat it. You just full stop. The dogs like fat and cats like protein. So, I can make a really high PAL dog food with a lot of fat, and they like it a lot. And animal protein is not just protein, but it's the cues that come with that cats like a proline or some of the what we might call sweet tasting fatty acids. A lot of PAL enhancers are simply hydrolyzed meats, hydrolyzed liver, because then the PAL happens as that hydrolysis happens. Pets solve a lot of problems with their nose, as people are not surprised by that with dogs, but they're somewhat, they don't know how well cats smell as well. So you want to know about the olfactory.
And cats, what about cats? What is their preferable palatability?
It's interesting because many people know about dogs having this wonderful sense of smell, and they just solve a lot of problems with smell that we don't even recognize. Cats smell too, and so their approach to palatability is driven by what they smell, and of course, cats like different things. They don't taste things the same way as maybe we do, or we're more like dogs. But they do smell, and so that you're interested in those olfactory notes that are coming out of the pet food for sure.
Yeah, maybe a very quick question before interests me, maybe as a kind of trick for owners. Let's assume there's a dog food, right, that is therapeutic, and there's not many choices, and the animal has to have these foods. Are there any tricks the owner can do at home that you think from palatability to enhance them?
Well, lots of times, especially dogs, like a softer food. And so you can add a little broth or warm water to it, and that will enhance palatability and choice. Be very careful with warming food, because cats and dogs aren't really good at saying, I don't want to eat that, it's just too hot. So be careful with that, but it's certainly possible to warm it a little.
And are there some toppers, for example? I know that it's a big thing, and consumers love toppers, right?
Yeah, there's very high PAL toppers that are sold and probably valuable, not sold for their nutrition, but sold for their great taste. And you're kind of incentivizing the pet to eat the whole thing because you put the toppers on it. I think that's
And what's in them usually in those toppers, or what are?
I think it's often hydrolyzed proteins. Cats really like a sort of tart taste. They use what is it? Sodium. I've forgotten. There's some PAL enhancers that are, kind of taste tart to me that cats really like.
It's time for our famous three.
Great. We're almost at the end of our episodes, and now comes to a fun part. And I know that you enjoy those questions a lot about a little bit, bringing your side into it. So we always ask the question, what is your favorite industry-specific book or resource that you can recommend?
I really like that question because it's changed. My answer has changed over time. I think today, with the accessibility of peer-reviewed journal articles, it's really quite easy to go to the primary resources and read them. And that's what I tend to do. There's some good review articles that, experts bring together thought, and I like those. And sometimes they would appear in text. I actually don't use my textbooks that I have kept over the years, and actually thrown away a number of them because it's really good and easy to just go to the primary science. So that's what I like to do best.
And I know that you're an avid reader. What is your favorite book outside your industry?
Oh, it's the resource. So I do love to read. I think there's really two resources that are outside of the industry that I wanted to talk about. I'm a Christian, so I understand that there's truth, and God reveals that truth in two ways. Really, we have an understanding of truth as revealed in the scientific method, which we've been talking about, having an unanswered questions, coming up with a testable hypothesis, observing through repeatable methods, and putting it all together in an orderly fashion. So I think that works, in our industry and outside of our industry. The other primary research for me is really revealed truth as contained in the Bible. It's as a scientific evaluation helps us to understand the things that happen, the things that are measured, basically what happens and how it happens. A biblical understanding is the things that cannot be put on a scale or on a spectrophotometer, but we understand things like how we acquire a knowledge of things like love and joy and peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And the other things in life, things like unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, murder, strife, deceit, malice. Of course, both of these things can be misunderstood. We have truth revealed, and understanding and application of that truth, two very different things. I think I've really made a career out of understanding biological truth. I wonder, as I answer your question, if perhaps the more important thing is understanding the things that can't be so easily measured, and my resource, so that would be the Bible.
So that brings me also to the last question. From your career path, if you would make your experiences, your recommendations to the young professionals, what sets apart a really successful professional in the pet food science industry?
Well, I think the first thing to ask someone, I wish someone would have asked me, what do you think success is? Because, it's hard to hit a goal when you don't know what it is. So some people would define it differently than me. For me, success has been, you want some sort of abundance in life, including things that, you can buy or things that you can experience. And it's not just, making the most money, having the most powerful position in a organization. But I think, as I think about that, I've sort of come up with, I believe it's really conscientiousness might be that characteristics of success that I've observed and sort of wish to develop in my life: being organized, dependable, disciplined, driven to complete a task from start to finish, some self-motivation, being proactive, dependable. And I think these are things that really do lead to success. And that's what I would tell someone to try and develop in their life. It's a really good characteristic.
That's wonderful. That's very, very good advice. Thank you so much, Dr. Dennis Jewell. It was very inspiring about palatability, but also your insights in the personal, like success and so on.
Okay.
So that concludes another episode of the Pet Food Science Podcast, presented to you by WiseNetics. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review. Until next time, this is Jan Sogodolski from the Pet Food Science Podcast signing off. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Jan.